Well, good morning and welcome everyone. This is Signs of Change, number 12. And we are here with our good friends and on a Monday morning. It's always a pleasure to come here and do the study. This is a repeat from a study from Friday night, but it's a more relaxed setting, more relaxed domestic setting kind of thing. And doesn't have all the tensions at the end of the week. People are exhausted. People are feeling a little bit more lively and relaxed, as I say. So it's a good occasion. And today we're beginning on the book of Daniel, which is in the Christian Bible. It's placed as one of what is called the four major prophets, which is Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. But in the Jewish Bible, it's not among the prophets, it's among the writings, which tells us that it was late, that it was actually composed at least at the earliest really in the 2nd century. And the internal evidence tells us that as well, that if you consider everything that's talked about in the book of Daniel, it brings you right up to the period of the Greeks and of this particular king, Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a king of the Greek Syrian kingdom based in Antioch. And a crisis that erupted around him and his policies in a very distinct frame of time, from around the year 170 before Christ to the year 164 when this king died. So of all the books of the Bible that we've looked at, this book is the most precisely dated. And it's, as I say, it's contemporary with this crisis erupting from the Greek kingdom of Antiochus. And you'll see how relevant the name Greek for the kingdom is, because the king and several collaborators, Jewish people in Israel, in Judea and Jerusalem, very much favored abandoning the Jewish way of life and taking on what they saw as the Greek way of life, which they considered to be superior. And of course, the Greek way of life is very, very attractive and has exercised enormous influence. Hi, good morning. the Greek civilization and culture has exercised enormous influence all the way through to our present day. That if you go to Washington D.C., for example, all the great buildings, the Capitol buildings, they're all modeled on Greek architecture. So Greek architecture, civic, urban planning, the way of life of the baths, the gymnasia, the hippodrome, the exercising and racing of horses, all these things, plus the tragedies, the Greek tragedies, Greek art, and of course, Greek philosophy. All this has exercised a huge influence upon our culture and is arguably of greater influence than biblical culture, even despite the fact that, we call ourselves a Christian nation, that kind of thing. You could say that ultimately the values are the rational values of the Greek world, and their values of beauty, their ideals of beauty and physical health and physical prowess, all that kind of stuff. So you can imagine how seductive it was, if it's still powerful now, how powerful it was back there at that time, and what an impact, a huge cultural impact Alexander the Great, who was the general, as we all know, who kind of basically conquered the whole known world at that time and introduced this culture throughout the ancient world, the ancient Mediterranean world, and reaching all the way over to India and Afghanistan. His troops got as far as that. And they only really stopped because they were absolutely exhausted and they were just missing their homes. And there's always a suspicion that his troops and his generals actually poisoned Alexander the Great because he had such a lust and desire to conquer everything, every darn thing he saw, that they couldn't take it anymore, and they did him in. But anyhow, that's a by the way. It does serve to illustrate the immense explosive dynamic of the Greek world through Alexander of Macedon. And then I mean, that happened at the beginning of the 4th century. Then it took some time to work its way through, and it was in the 2nd century that the crisis really hit Judea. So that's what we're looking at today, and because of that, we're looking at perhaps a recognizably modern world. What we would be looking at before, up to this point, takes us back to the origins of Israel, the biblical world, the classic biblical world of Moses, the Exodus, and then the kings, the kings of the north and the south, and then the exile under Babylon. These are ancient histories. But when you get to Alexander and you get to the Greeks, there's something modern about it. And when we read Daniel, we get that feel of the crisis of what I'm calling imperial violence. In other words, these nations that have expanded in their military and physical power, beginning with Babylon, going through the Medes, a small group called the Medes, but then the Persians, who had a long imperial rule, and then afterwards the Greeks. You're getting these empires with accumulating force and reach. They're getting the military empires are getting greater and greater within their own terms, but as when they get to be great, other people go in the opposite direction. They're crushed and blown away like the dust of history when these huge monumental empires establish themselves. So that gets to be a modern crisis, and of course the Romans were a continuation of the Greeks, and were even more forceful and more powerful than Alexander was. And we also trace our culture from the Romans. When I was at school, we did Latin, and the teacher also taught us Roman history, and he did it every week. And I always wondered, why are these ancient Romans, these kings and then the emperors, why are they so important to us? They seem a long time ago, but they were. I mean, they set the standard, they set the bar for imperial rule and for the kind of civic life of Rome, the civic life of any great center, any capital center. And so we are in their era, and then the response of the Bible to that era, to that inbreaking imperial power and sway that those empires had across the world, in the sense that the little nations were being crushed, and then Judea being a little nation under that, their experience of that, at the same time as knowing that they were called, especially by God, and they were called to be a light to the Gentiles in the words of Isaiah the prophet. The reaction of a group of Jews that we see in the book of Daniel is absolutely exceptional, and it's at the same level in cultural and spiritual terms, shall we say, as the arrival of these giant imperial entities like Persia, Greece, and Rome. So the answer the Bible gives, shall we say, is as great and as powerful in its way as this new cultural phenomenon, cultural, political, historical phenomenon of the Greeks and the Romans. And what is it that the book of Daniel does that answers this new phenomenon? It does something absolutely crazy that you would hardly believe anybody would have the nerve for it. But basically it says that because we cannot resist, there's no way we can resist these powers. God is actually going to do it for us. And he's going to do it. God is going to do it for real. In other words, what happens is that the old-fashioned world in which God is basically in heaven, in God's place, and God is ruling the world through his word, his prophets, his spirit, that kind of basically calm and stable tradition has been broken away, has been kind of overwhelmed by these imperial forces. And so the Bible in the book of Daniel sees God actually kind of bringing to an end that old-fashioned stable world, stable order, and breaking into the world order to establish a divine order and kingdom that has not been done before. And part of this divine order, this new divine order, is resurrection. Because, as we'll see, those who die without violence, and we will see this as we go along, who die non-resistingly to the sword, by the sword of the imperial forces, the vision of Daniel does not say, okay, well, they're just dead like everybody else is dead. You know, that was the fate that was coming to them. He says, no, this is so wrong. This is so unrighteous. It's so evil in the world that God is also going to raise them up. So raising up these victims of these new forces, or beasts, as Daniel will call them, beasts from the abyss, from the pit, raising up these victims becomes a way of overthrowing, or is the definitive way of overthrowing the empires. Because if you or me or anybody are killed for our faith, and that's the end of the matter, it means that whoever killed us basically wins. But Daniel says, no, they don't win. Because if you're killed for your allegiance to the God of justice and righteousness and I think non-violence, God will raise you up and therefore prove to the empires they will actually raise up as well to shame. That those who are faithful to the way of God in the world, they will rise to everlasting glory, and they will shine like the stars of the heavens. But the wicked shall rise to it doesn't say they will rise to punishment. It's very interesting that the book of Daniel doesn't say they will rise to eternal torment. They will rise to shame. In other words, their point of view, their way of doing things will be proven categorically wrong. If you're proven wrong, then you're ashamed. Like Maggie was saying, the French players in the World Cup final yesterday didn't like to wear their second place medals because it was kind of like shameful. Well, now imagine the shame that is going to happen when your whole kind of view of the world, your whole construction of the world as power and glory, worldly glory and wealth and violence, all that is overthrown. You've backed the wrong horse, really. So that's what the resurrection in Daniel is all about. And it's very interesting that, you know, in the Christian era, it came to appear as punishment, as violent torture. But I think actually it probably still has that basic meaning, that the fire that we hear talked about in Matthew 25 is the fire of shame, the fire of being existentially and spiritually totally wrong and proven to be that. You know, that's and of course, you know, someone could still resist, you still have freedom, but it's not a pleasant way to be. It's a very unpleasant way to be. So all these things happen in the 2nd century, this change vision of the world. So what you basically get is you get this comfortable kind of like train of history moving forward, and suddenly Daniel flips it up like that, flips it on end, and you really can't understand Jesus, I don't think, in his gospel, like proclaiming the kingdom of God. That is the kingdom that is announced in Daniel, that God is going to take a hand, when God is going to rule. So when Jesus says the kingdom of God is the hand, that's where he's getting it from. He's not just imagining this. Someone said it about 200 years before him. So Jesus lives in that flipped over world that Daniel created in its writing. So what we're looking at now when we get to Daniel is a really big shift in the style of the biblical narrative, in its world frame, the frame of the world and its history that it understood. It's a very big shift, and it brings us to the threshold, to the doorstep of the gospel. So it's a big moment it's a big point in the book, Signs of Change, when you get to Daniel. Now, to understand Daniel and to understand what's at stake, you have to also understand that the political conditions in Judea were very, very chaotic, and there were many who wanted basically to get along, as I was saying, to collaborate with the Greeks and to get along with them and to actually change the Jewish culture. So we're going to look at that now to get a sense of that background, because once you get a sense of the turmoil and the pressures, you can understand more of the spirituality of the Daniel group. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to enter into the spiritual mindset and the alternative way of looking at everything that the Daniel group had. So we begin with the book of Maccabees. If you so the two books of Maccabees are in the Apocrypha, 1 and 2 Maccabees, and they kind of belong together because they talk about the Maccabees, who are the militant, violent resistors, the family led by a priest by the name of Mattathias, who resisted the Greek Syrian king Antiochus, and the first book tells, it's basically a kind of propaganda piece for the Maccabees. The The second book, the two Maccabees, is more of a kind of a Deuteronomic style story. It's more like what God is doing. But the first Maccabees is really what the Maccabees do. So we're going to tell their story a little bit. So we look at chapter 1, verses 1 to 15. It kind of sets the scene for us very well, those verses. Chapter 1 of First Maccabees, 1 to 15, if someone would read that. If you got the book, you got it there?
I'm trying to pull it up on my. It won't go. Come on.
Reading, Tony. I lost connection and now you're back.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, we're looking at the first book of Maccabees, chapter 1, verses 1 through 15.
Do I have Maccabees in the Bible, in my Bible? I don't think I do.
You may not. You may not. You've got to have the Revised Standard Version with the Apocrypha. You may not have it.
Okay,
I'm sorry about that, but
Let me see.
you.
I finally got myself off mute. I can read it.
Oh,
I'm
Kat,
trying to
praise
get myself
God.
off mute.
You've got
Okay,
your off mute and you've got the book.
I've
Please
got
read it.
the first book of Maccabees, chapter 1, 1 through 15.
Exactly right.
Okay. The history begins with Alexander the Great, son of Philip of Macedonia, marched from Macedonia and attacked Darius, king of Persia and Media. Alexander enlarged the Greek Empire by defeating Darius and seizing his throne. He fought many battles, capturing fortified cities, and put the kings of the region to death. As he advanced to the ends of the earth, he plundered many nations. And when he had conquered the world, he became proud and arrogant. By building up a strong army, he dominated whole nations for their rulers and forced everyone to pay him taxes. When Alexander had been emperor for 12 years, he fell ill and realized that he was about to die. He called together his generals, noblemen who had been brought up with him since early childhood, and he divided his empire, giving a part to each of them. After his death, the generals took control, and each had himself crowned king of his own territory. The descendants of these kings ruled for many generations and brought a great deal of misery on the world.
There you go.
The wicked ruler, how do you say that?
Antiochus.
Antiochus. How do you say the next one? Epiphany.
Yeah, good.
Son of King Antiochus, the third of Syria, was a descendant of one of Alexander's generals. Antiochus Epiphanes had been hostage in Rome before he became king of Syria in the year 137. At that time, he appeared in the land of Israel, a group of treacherous Jews that had no regard for the law and who had a bad influence on many of our people. They said, "Let's come to terms with the Gentiles, for our refusal to associate with them has brought us nothing but trouble." This proposal appealed to many, and some of them became so enthusiastic about it that they went to the king and received from him permission to file Gentile customs. They built in Jerusalem a stadium like those in the Greek cities. They had surgery performed to hide their circumcision, abandoned the Holy Covenant, started associating with Gentiles, and did all sorts of other evil things.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's a summary. What is that picture of? What I mean, that's quite a lot of stuff happening right there. What happens? How does it start?
Taking over the world.
Taking over the world. Who does that?
Alexander.
Alexander, that's right. Alexander basically takes over the world. Then he dies. And he splits his reign among his generals. I mean, he's like Napoleon. He's exactly like Napoleon. Napoleon put his relatives and friends in all the royal houses of Europe. This is what Alexander did. Then it gets that's the whole world picture. Then it gets to little old Judea and Jerusalem. And what happens there?
Well, they wanted to make peace in a way, so they covenant with them and they were giving up their own faith in a way.
Yeah, right. And which is in what ways did they give up their faith? They had a stadium or a gymnasia. They had surgery done on their penises to actually try to reverse the effect of circumcision, so that when they went to the baths, they wouldn't be noticed as, I mean, it goes as far as that. It goes as far as cosmetic surgery in order not to be identified as Jewish. And they're giving up the covenant. Now, we've not really had this before. We've had people going off with other gods, serving other gods, but not going over to another culture. So this is something dramatically new. If we go to 2 Maccabees, it's the same thing. I'm just reading it now. Actually, it's in the book, so you'll find it more easily in the book. On page 102, if you go to 102 of the book, this is from 2 Maccabees, and it's talking about different competitors for the office of the high priest. So this is another element of the corruption, that the high priest now, the office they had, high priest, had become a political office with political rewards, and there were people vying for it and struggling with each other, and getting the support of this king Antiochus in order to be the high priest. And one of the great offenders was this guy called Jason, which is a Greek name. So you can see the what they call the Hellenization, the effect of the Greek world overtaking the traditional classic Jewish world. So would someone perhaps read that passage on the top of page 102, the one indented?
I will.
Thank you.
When the king assented and Jason came to office, he at once shifted his compatriots over to the Greek way of life. He set aside the existing royal concessions to the Jews, and he destroyed the lawful ways of living, and he introduced new customs contrary to the law. He took delight in establishing a gymnasium right under the synagogue, and he induced the noblest of young men to wear the Greek hat. There was such an extreme Hellenization and increase in the adoption of foreign ways because of the surprising wickedness of Jason, who was ungodly and no true priest, that the priests were no longer intent upon their service at the altar. Despising the sanctuary and neglecting the sacrifices, they hurried to take part in the unlawful proceedings in the wrestling arena after the signal for the discus throwing, disdaining the honors prized by their ancestors and putting the highest value upon Greek forms of prestige.
Now that's the actual text. I mean, that's written in the 2nd century, towards the end of the 2nd century. So they already had names. They know Greek prestige and Hellenization. I mean, it definitely was a cultural struggle, a culture war that was going on. And as I say, it's really the first time it had happened, in the sense that it's the culture, not so much the gods, although the gods are involved, and Antiochus will try to impose Greek gods, but it's a seduction of a different way of life in the earth, a different way of being human on the earth. So when we talk about the Gospels as teaching a different way of being human, it has its roots here in that struggle. What is the way to be human on the earth? And of course, the Greek way is very, as we said, is very attractive. It has a lot to offer, very powerful, and it was for many at that time seen as really in opposition to the Jewish way of life. Especially we think of Ezra and Nehemiah and the way they had tried to establish very strictly the Jewish way of life. Go ahead, Maggie.
The Maccabees aren't part of our the New Testament.
Right.
Was the Maccabees part of the Torah? Like, did Jews know about this?
They absolutely know about it. It's part of their story. And as a matter of fact, the Feast of Hanukkah, which is the dedication of the temple, comes from the Maccabees, because the Maccabees, when they revolted, and we're going to look at that right now, when they revolted, it took them 3.5 years to drive back the forces of Antiochus and to overcome what they saw as the desolation and the abomination of the temple, when some kind of altar was set up there over the altar of sacrifices, an altar that offered sacrifices to Zeus. When that was all carried through, they had the rededication of the temple, which is the Feast of Hanukkah, and they still celebrate around about Christmas time that enormous victory as far as the Maccabees were concerned, and that regime, that dynasty that the Maccabees established, called the Hasmonean dynasty, they ruled all the way through to Herod the Great. Now, Herod wasn't actually an offspring of the Maccabees, but he married into the family. So that regime of the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, carried on all the way through to Jesus, and Jesus had to deal with Herod the Great, who tried to kill him in the story in Matthew, and then when Herod, his son, Herod Antipas, was his enemy. So yeah, that there is a real continuity, but it's a strange continuity, because Hanukkah is not part of the Torah. Like you say, the Torah establishes the feasts of weeks, the Feast of Pentecost, the Feast of Passover, and the Feast of Tabernacles. Those are the classic feasts. Hanukkah is not one of the Torah feasts, but you can see how politically and culturally it's a very important feast. So yeah, there's a kind of division of the way there. Things are splitting up, and things are people are taking different positions, and you have this massive war against the Romans later on, which is in a way a repeat of the Maccabees.
So in a way that they were a little ashamed of it, so that's why it's not included in the Torah.
Well, the Torah is already written by this time.
Okay.
The Torah is already established by this
So this
point.
came after the Torah.
It came after the Torah. The Torah and the 12 prophets are already established by this point of time. Okay. So you're talking about mature Judaism at this point in time, but under the pressure of the Greek world. And so something new, it's more kind of like national Judaism. Hanukkah represents national Judaism, I would say, rather than classic covenant Judaism, the Torah Judaism, because it involves intense militancy. So this is the issue that we're looking at. That's precisely the issue. How do you deal with a modern world where violence is increasing and increasing, and you have, and plus there's this enormous cultural seduction? How do you deal with it? Well, one group will say very clearly, we have to pick up the sword and we have to defend ourselves with the sword. And that, of course, becomes a repetitive motif. It happens again and again. It's happened in the 20th century, in the 21st century. So, you know, it's always that. But there is this other group, and this is what we're saying, and this is has never been brought to the surface before, that at the same time as this kind of automatic natural response to oppression of picking up the sword, this other response, which is what we call apocalyptic or kind of otherworldly, but the other world breaking into this world, that happens at the same time. But the argument here is that response is non-violent. That has not really been brought to the surface before. It's been actually seen more as a head trip. You know, like you're in this other world in your head. Well, it has to have real impact in this world, and one of its key impacts, I think, is non-violence, and we'll see that. So, thanks for that question. So let's go now to the response of the Maccabees, what they do. So, if we look at page 104, there's another passage there from the first Maccabees about the king giving an order. So as well as this kind of civil war or cultural war in Judea between the collaborators, the accommodationists, and the traditionalists, the king gets involved, and he comes down obviously on the side of the collaborators, and he issues this edict which basically says there will be no more Jewish religion, and that's on page 104. If someone would like to read that.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the king wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and that all should give up their particular customs. All the Gentiles accepted the command of the king. Many, even from Israel, gladly adapted his religion. They sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. And the king sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the towns of Judea. He directed that to follow the customs strange to the land, to forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane the Sabbath and festivals, to defile the sanctuary and the priests, to build altars and sacred precepts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice some other unclean animals, and to leave the uncircumcised. They were to make themselves abominable by everything unclean and profane, so that they would forget the law and change all the ordinances. He added, and whoever does not obey the command of the king shall die.
Thank you very much. So that's the situation. And what happens, the story of Maccabees then unfolds, that the king's officers with a troop of soldiers go to a little town called Modane, and command everybody to sacrifice on a pagan altar, and people are doing it. And then Mattathias, who himself is a priest, but not of the high priestly families, he refuses and kills the officer there on his own altar. And he thereby raises the signal of revolt, and he has 4 or 5 sons who follow him, the first being Judas Maccabeus, who's the most famous, and they take off to the hills, to the wilderness, and they begin a guerrilla campaign, a very successful guerrilla campaign against the Syrian Greek king and his armies. So this is the story of that. It's the story of Jesse James. It's the story of Ned Tyler, all the rebels and the outlaws. This and of David himself, who was an outlaw for a while. It's the story of taking off to the hills and killing the invading army any opportunity you can get. And they, as I say, they succeeded. It took them about 3.5 years to do it, and then they eventually drove out the Greek army, and they rededicated the temple, which was a big moment of success for them. And they themselves then established themselves as high priests. So the Maccabeans, the successors of the Maccabeans, especially one called Jonathan, established himself as a high priest, and which was against the law because he was not of the high priestly families, but because they had all the power, and the power figure in Jerusalem was the high priest, they took it over. So that would be one instance whereby people would see the temple, just in parenthesis here, they would see the temple and they would see the sacrifices of the temple as compromised, as somehow or other not truly according to the law, and therefore not pleasing to God. So that would be the opinion of the Essenes, the people probably who lived at Qumran. They had removed themselves from all the worship of Judea, of Jerusalem and the temple, because it was profaned by illegitimate practitioners, priests. So that's the situation, and you can see it's a hot situation. You can see it's a situation of crisis, of anger, of really serious things at stake. It reminds me a lot of North America at that particular point in time. You know, so much is at stake in people's minds about what is right and what's wrong, and what to do and how to respond, all that kind of thing. So anyway, the story develops, and this is where it gets really interesting. On page 105, we have excerpts there of 1 Maccabees telling about another group. So you have the Maccabees, beginning with Mattathias, who rebel with the sword against the Greeks. They're called the Seleucids. And then you have another group, and I will read this here. So we're on page 105, and this is important because it gets really we're getting really to the heart of the matter here. The story goes on to describe a hugely successful military campaign by Mattathias' sons, especially Judas, issuing quickly in the purification and rededication of the temple. But before the story develops, before the very first battles, there is an episode inserted which signals something else happening in Israel. Something else happening in Israel. Something which shows us that Mattathias' generative violence is not the only possibility emerging from Israel's covenant of holiness. And so I'm quoting, and this is the reason why 1 and 2 Maccabees needs to be in the Bible. It's because of this story. You can't really get the whole context without Maccabees. At that time, many who were seeking righteousness and justice went down to the wilderness to live there. They, their sons, their wives, and their livestock, because troubles pressed heavily upon them. It seems that before Mattathias killed his man and took to the hills, a significant body of Jews had chosen internal exile, finding a home in the wilderness rather than continue to associate with the horrible cultural and religious offense going on in Jerusalem. Mattathias and his followers clearly share in the same deep alienation, but this other group had taken a step beyond violence. It seems that their sense of holiness has precluded it, at least in one instance. We learned that the king's troops pursued the group, then on the Sabbath, challenged them to surrender or do battle. The result is as striking as it is full of desperate pathos. The group said, "We will not come out, nor will we do what the king commands, and so profane the Sabbath." So they considered, they were so pure in their righteousness, they considered fighting on the Sabbath to be profaning the Sabbath, to be against the spirit and the meaning of the Sabbath. Then the enemy quickly attacked them, but they did not answer them or hurl a stone at them or block up their hiding places. For they said, "Let us all die in our innocence. Heaven and earth testify for us that you are killing us unjustly." Heaven and earth is on our side. So they attacked them on the Sabbath, and they died with their wives and children and livestock to the number of 1,000 persons. So they are the 1,000 non-violent martyrs of the Maccabees. You don't hear about them, but you hear about them now. The 1,000 non-violent martyrs of the Maccabees. And the story then, the text goes on to say that the Mattathias says, well, if we all do what they do, we're all going to be killed. We're going to have to fight. So there's a kind of like, we're going to have to fight on the Sabbath, but there's also an implication that fighting is the right thing. The fighting is the right way for them to go, whereas these people had chosen not to fight. So if we think about this group, these 1,000 people who refuse to fight on the Sabbath, this is a pretty amazing event. It's not really happened before in the history of Israel. This is important information, that a group of 1,000, including children, you know, you're risking the lives. You're actually giving up the lives of your children because they're all going to be killed. And so the sense of the Sabbath must be so powerful for them that they're prepared to do this. Now, I would say when we think about the Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath, we have all the discussions in the gospel, and it seems like legalistic, you know, that you shouldn't heal on the Sabbath, that kind of thing. But we know that the rabbis, who are, at least their teaching is reported later than the Gospels, they actually permit healing on the Sabbath. And there was obviously this discussion here as whether it was right or wrong to fight on the Sabbath. But of course, it's, you know, as the Mattathias says, it's not simply right or wrong. It's an existential demand. You know, if you don't fight, you're not going to exist anymore. But this other group, they go the extra step. And so the Sabbath must have meant so much to them. It must have meant there was some sense, not just of external holiness, of, you know, it's important you keep these rules, but something inside them that said, this is God's way. This is God's way on earth, because God rests on the Sabbath, as we know in the book of Genesis. So it's the place where there is this sense of the fullness of life, of shalom, of peace and life in the world. And that was so valuable to them that they wouldn't fight. And so there's something in there that overcomes violence. It doesn't say, you know, we're non-violent. It says we're not going to fight on the Sabbath. But there's something in it, something at the heart of it, which I think is non-violence. It's the spirit of the Sabbath, that Jesus says, what is it right to do, good or not do good on the Sabbath? The whole point of the Sabbath is to do good, to make good, to make the world good. And so they've discovered that, and they don't fight. The Maccabees, whoever wrote the first book of Maccabees, understands that this group has enough spiritual prestige. They're important enough to tell the story, you know, and if they weren't important, why tell the story? Just say they rebelled against the king. They led a successful guerrilla campaign. Why tell a story of a different group? Unless they had some, you have to kind of put them to the side. You have to deal with them somehow. You have to say, well, they're wrong. They're great. They're very honorable, but they're wrong, which is the classic argument against nonviolence, you know, that it's good, it's kind of noble, but it's wrong. It doesn't work, you know. So that's the background to the book of Daniel, which is playing out in exactly the same time frame as the crisis of Antiochus, and we'll see that more clearly next week when we go through some in more details. But at the moment, I want to turn our attention directly to the kind of core revelation or dream vision of Daniel in chapter 7 of the book of Daniel, which sets the scene. It's a very powerful scene setting in a vision, a dream vision, that says the world is what you. It doesn't talk about the Maccabees at all. In fact, they are the elephant in the room. It's just amazing how the book of Daniel, written at the same time, has no mention at all of the Maccabees or the revolt. Nothing at all. It doesn't, and that itself suggests they have a very different way of doing things. It doesn't give them any honor or status. It doesn't speak bad of them, but they're just not there. What is there is these visions of Daniel, these interpretations of dreams in the earlier part of Daniel, and a new figure, one like a son of man. And so that vision, it's going to be like, I don't know, you know, the bombs are falling, the armies are invading, and then Daniel has this vision. You know, he's like, you could hear the bombs going off outside almost, you know. You could hear the armies tramping. But he's not paying attention to that. He's paying attention to this other thing. And so we're going to read that now, because that brings us to this connection, I think, this synapse, this kind of like live connection between that group, the 1,000 martyrs, nonviolent martyrs, and the vision of Daniel. So let's read, get to Daniel and read chapter 7, verses 1 chapter 7 verses 1 through to 14. So if someone would like to read that, chapter 7 of Daniel, verses 1 through to 14.
I can read it.
Thank you very much.
In the first year of King Belshazzar
That'll do.
of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head as he lay in bed. Then he wrote down the dream. I, Daniel, saw in my vision by night the 4 winds of heaven stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle wings. Then I watched its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a human being, and a human mind was given to it. Another beast appeared, a second one, that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side, had 3 tusks in its mouth among its teeth, and was told, "Arise, devour many bodies." After this, as I watched, another appeared, like a leopard. The beast had 4 wings of a bird on its back and 4 heads, and domain was given to it. After this, I saw in the visions by night a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong,
Mm.
It had great iron teeth and was devouring, breaking its pieces, and stamping what was left with his feet. It was different from all the beasts that preceded it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns when another horn appeared, a little one that came up among them. 3 of the original horns were plucked up from before it. There were eyes like human eyes in this horn and a mouth speaking arrogantly. As I watched, thorns were set in place, and an ancient one took his throne. His clothes was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence. 1,000 thousands served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I watched then because of the noise of the arrogant words that the horn was speaking. And as I watched, the beast was put to death, and its body destroyed and given to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. As I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given domain and glory and kinship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His domain is an everlasting domain that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed.
Thank you very much. So, having set the scene of the Greek king, the rebellion against the king, the successful rebellion, the martyrs in the wilderness, and then this writing about Daniel, it's actually set in the court of Babylon beforehand, but it's very evident that, you know, just the 10 kings and then the 3 kings refer to the political events after Alexander, and the 4 kingdoms definitely refer to the Babylonians, the Persians, the Medes, and the Greeks. So it has to be post-Alexander and post the successors of Alexander. So the whole thing is placed at the time of Babylon in order to basically show that this has all been provided for before, in the situation of exile, in the situation of oppression, that God has taken a hand. And then in chapter 7, well, is going to take a hand. Then in chapter 7, we see this kind of a dramatic kind of wonderful the highest expression of the mysticism of Daniel, of him seeing the beasts and then something else. So what does this all of this suggest to you against that background?
That the kingdoms led by kings are eventually going to fail, and that the true one will be coming, and there'll be life forever.
Right.
And it's good. There's going to be one like a son of man or a human. So God is going to do this through his an agent that's here on earth.
That's very true, Jerry. That is a very important part of the two. I think the 2 important parts are the beasts, the very physical description of the beasts, they're getting worse. They're getting worse all the time. They had nothing like the atomic bomb. They didn't have nuclear weapons. So we have gone down the line some from them, but it's still the same mechanism. It's still the same dynamic. They just get more violent. That's the same dynamic. And then you have this marvelous image, this vision of the Ancient of Days. He's not called God. He's not called Elohim, or Yahweh. And so there's another feeling of God here. There's another sense of who or what God is. He's taken it away. I mean, elsewhere it talks about the Lord and it talks about God in the book of Daniel. But here, the Ancient of Days is just it's a divine figure. Everyone serves him, who accompanies the time of the earth. The Ancient of Days is someone who belongs alongside the ages of our human existence. So he's always been there. But then this new figure comes. That's what you're saying, Jerry. This new figure comes who is not a beast. He's one like a human being. He looks like, that's basically what he says. This one looks like a human being. He looks like me or you, right? He looks like us. He doesn't have. Go ahead, Jerry. Go on.
And his clothes are white as snow, and
Right.
that reminds me of Jesus and the Mount of Transfiguration.
Right. Yes, it does.
I think they use the very same words.
Yes, I think that is right. And so actually the Mount of Transfiguration refers to this vision. It refers to it's pre-resurrection. It refers to the one like a human being in clothes as white as snow. So what is Daniel seeing then? He's seeing these two confluences, these two compressions of reality. One is the beasts, the kingdoms, and one is another figure who has clothes as white as snow. And I would suggest that white refers to nonviolence, because if you're violent, you're going to mess up your clothes. No doubt about it. You're going to get dirty. But this is kind of like an existential purity that is not involved in that, and he has no weapons. He has no weapons, and the beasts are thrown into the fire. Now the fire issues from the throne, issues from this ancient source, this ancient reality of God keeping company with human time. And of course, fire can have a violent connotation. I mean, fire is scary when it gets going, but it's also a very powerful image for life, for passion, for warmth, for the core of life, for the heart of life. If you stare into the fire, it's a very comforting thing to do. By Kat's fire pit in our in Bethany, we sat around the fire, and it was very beautiful, and always is. So fire has a very comforting and symbolic feel to it, as well as being very threatening. And I would say that along with all the other indications, this is the fire of divine love.
Right, because he's not saying that actually the beasts. When I reread this, it doesn't say to me that the beasts are destroyed, but it feels like that he's taking and destroying the violence.
Yes, I would say so, because the beast is not a human thing. So it's
right.
What is bestial is organization, the system, the symbolism, the meaning that human beings generate. It's not the human beings themselves. I mean, they're caught up in it for sure, but it doesn't say, you know, the kings and the soldiers and the Greeks are thrown into the fire. It just says their systems are thrown into the fire. But the fire, if it's the fire of love, will consume that, will consume all that stuff. It will destroy it all.
Well, the fire sterilizes and purifies too.
Right.
So
Yes.
it doesn't always destroy it all.
Right. Right.
Well, maybe, I don't know what the fire of God's going to do actually, but that's.
Well, if you put, so what I'm saying is, you put these two things together, you put the fire and the human being together, because the Ancient One on his throne gives all authority and dominion. It repeats it about 3 times. And dominion is another, and kingship. These are all words for kingdom. So it seems to me inescapable that if you have to find a scriptural reference for what Jesus meant when he says the kingdom of God is at hand, he's talking about this. He's talking about the kingdom that God is going to give. So if you put that together, you put the one like a son of man, the one who appears like a human being, together with the beasts and together with the fire, it suggests some agency which is not like the beasts. It suggests some actually very counter agency, that the beasts are kind of in between the fire and the human one. So it's like, it doesn't say nonviolence, but the imagery and in fact, it's even greater than saying nonviolence, you know? It's a spiritual reality which you kind of have to enter into, you know? It's like what I was saying about the martyrs and the why they're prepared to do something so humanly horrible and terrible, to sacrifice themselves and their children that way. It's because you've entered into a spiritual heart that it's very hard for the world to see, but because it belongs to the Ancient of Days, it's true, it's real, it's there. So it's a very dramatic vision, and I think well, anyone else has got something to say about it? A cat.
Yeah, I just was thinking for the first time about these beasts.
Yeah,
and
right.
How, so would you say them being described as beasts, that they have become basically unhuman?
Yeah.
They've taken on a different form with their arrogance and their
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, they've become dehumanized, even though they appear so glorious and so powerful on the earth. The last one ripping up and tearing everything to pieces. And so this passage, you know, exactly right. This passage offers a very profound critique, you know, of the imperial violent systems in which we live. It says precisely, this is not human. It says this is not the way human beings really are.
Well, this is a criticism of empires in every age, right up until today.
Yeah.
And today is the day of the American Empire.
Yes, 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 it is.
So this should be saying something to us about our current situation.
And I think it does. I think it very powerfully does. And it's because we shifted all the dynamic of the apocalyptic either to a violent end, which is the reading of the book of Revelation, which I don't think is the correct reading, or to heaven itself. So this, if you put Daniel in the context of that incredible crisis these people are in, with these pressures from the growing empires and their attractive culture, and members of your own people going over to it, you put all that, they're imagining a breakthrough of something that is different from all that. It can't be another army coming from the sky. That's just a repetition of the empires. It can't be that. It's just that they got better weapons. It has to be something else at play, and the name we give to it is nonviolence. But as I say, it has a greater spiritual depth here, but because of the fire and the throne and the ancient. These are all new images that have not been used before in the scriptures. And it actually amazes me that this book of Daniel is actually in the Bible. I think if people really understood, I think the reason why it's in the Bible is because the Pharisees liked it. The Pharisees held on to it. And the Pharisees were important and they had influence. I think they liked it because they have roots in the same, I think they have roots in the same group. And Daniel was, they belong somehow to the same root. But the inner content of the vision is more profound than that, and I think that than what they were teaching, and I think that Jesus really got to that inner content. That's why he says, the Son of Man must suffer, but yet you will see him coming on the clouds of heaven. I mean, it makes complete sense to me that Jesus would go to his death with this framework of thought and meaning. Otherwise, your death would be foolish. I mean, why do it? Why risk your death in that horrible way, in that disgraceful way? Where you're going to be evidently a failure. I mean, you're going to be. That's why they crucified people, to make people failures, evidently a failure. I mean, you're strung up for all to see and mock. So why do that? Why risk that unless you have this other way of looking at things, which believed that there was going to be a breakthrough of that divine fire and its meaning. And that Jesus says that I have a baptism to be baptized with, and I have there is a fire, and I wish I have come to bring fire, and how I wish the whole world was consumed by it. Now, if that's a fire of violence, then of course that's horrible. But if it's this other kind of transformative fire that we're talking about, we're thinking about, then of course it's profoundly meaningful, and it's all coherent, it all makes sense, it all fits together. So finally, then, what is your opinion? I mean, like, we can't be certain. There's no certainty to be had here. But I'm suggesting that group of 1,000 nonviolent martyrs, martyr means witness, they witness to something, were at least connected, spiritually connected to the writer of Daniel, if indeed Daniel was not a member of that group. The writer of Daniel was not a member of that group. So I'm saying that there is an historical connection. The book of Maccabees gives us the historical timeline of the revolt, the oppression, the revolt, all that kind of thing. But it also gives us this little story of the 1,000 martyrs. So I say that, like, spiritually and what you might almost is like sociologically, the kind of group, the character of the group that would do this and then would produce the book, they have to be connected. Although it's nowhere said that, but I think the evidence suggests that. How do you feel about that? I mean, you don't have to have an opinion, but I mean,
well, we don't really know if those people were resurrected or not. The people that sacrificed the martyrs back in.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so now I'm sure Jesus was familiar with that story.
Yes.
Do you think that did Jesus, was he assured that he was going to be resurrected, or do you think this was a risk for him as a human being that he couldn't be certain? So when he went to a cross, it was even in the Garden of Gethsemane, it was a struggle for him.
I think so. I mean, the natural instinct of the human organism, of any physical organism, is to defend itself. You know, if I reach out to strike you, you will blink. It's a natural reaction to defend your eyes. You know, that's the very first thing you want, to defend your eyes. And so the whole body is built that way. So to go against that, to go against your natural response, there has to be something else. But that something else is not as visible and as tangible as the body as we experience it. It has to be something that you relate to deeply. And I think the struggle would be that your body would resist. Your body says, don't do this. I mean your whole body self, not just the senses. Your whole self as a body would say, don't do this. It's not good. So I think that's where the struggle is. Your own self as a human being is conflicted. And it's naturally conflicted. And it's not wrong, it's right that it's conflicted, because I cannot stay healthy unless my body has immunity. And so that's in some degree a struggle of one organism against another. But this is a relationship that goes deeper than that. And so Jesus, I think you're right, Jesus followed that through. And I think he was very sure of it. But in the Garden of Gethsemane, the body self rose up and said, this is the absolutely wrong thing to do. And that's going to happen to any of us. It's going to happen. This is not the right thing or a human thing to do. So you have to hang on to that other relationship and say, I know my body feels this and says this, but this other relationship is more profound and it will succeed. And so there was a risk. Yes, it's a human risk. I think when he's praying to the Father, or on the mountaintop, shall we say, in the Transfiguration, the sense of the risk would not be there. But in those last moments, yes, the sense of the risk, and that's what makes it credible for us, for each of us. Because the same thing is does happen to each of us every day, that we, am I going to do this? Am I going to go that way? The way of peace, of forgiveness, non-violence, non-retaliation, or the other way. And if we win 5 times out of 10, that's good going.
I absolutely agree with you, Tony. I think the most beautiful part about having that moment of struggle, like I think Jesus did have in Gethsemane, coming that humanness about him.
Yeah, right.
The thousands who gave up their lives innocently. I'm sure all of them had that moment.
Right.
But because of God's love for them, the love of God outweighed it.
Yeah.
And comforted them out to go ahead with what they were doing.
That's right, because it says in the Garden of Gethsemane, the angels came to minister to him, and angels are just messengers from God. So I think after that point, he was calm.
Right. So God came to comfort, which I'm sure happened with the 1,000.
Right.
And that just makes it even more amazingly remarkable about how God loves us, because God went through the same doubt, that
Right.
same struggle. So God again shows
Right.
us how he understands our struggles.
Right. Really. Yeah.
So, and that to me is beautiful.
It is beautiful, and it's it's powerful stuff. And I think the book of Daniel, coming as it does in the Jewish Bible, coming at the end, like when we put it in the middle there with Jeremiah and Isaiah, we kind of miss the point largely of what it's doing and what it's saying. But if you follow the Jewish way and say, well, it comes at the end, then you gain a sense of, oh, well, the stakes are higher now. The stakes are much higher. This is not just about keeping Jerusalem or losing Jerusalem. This is
I
about.
think we need to read and understand Daniel today, and somehow understand how this message applies to us today, living in Empire America. And how do we respond? We're not being persecuted. We're not being threatened with death or anything, but we're living in empire, and
Right.
that we have to make us understand this.
We're not being persecuted because this whole message has been neutralized. It has no impact. It has no effect. If you manage to persuade enough people that this is what this is talking about, this is really what it's talking about, a different way of being human on earth. Oh yeah, then it would get a little tricky. It would get a little spicy.
Now, I don't know what you mean by saying that the message has been neutralized.
Well, I mean to say that, by putting it in the middle, and by emphasizing what is seen as the violent nature of the apocalypse in the book of Revelation, that God is just the same as the empires. So God is going to come back and destroy the empires violently. By saying that, then the question of how we should be human on earth is redundant, because in fact God says you're doing fine, and I'm actually just like you. I'm going to destroy my enemies. But then if you say there's something else, another relationship that the 1,000 martyrs had, and they saw something different, then that's to give an energy back to the story that is very, very powerful, very transformative.
Oh, so you're just saying that nonviolence has been pushed aside, and this whole story of Daniel has been pushed aside.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't think I don't hear any preachers preaching about Daniel or doing much.
No. I mean, a lot of people don't like Daniel.
Yeah. Well, they do think of the one like a Son of Man coming. That's familiar, because Jesus used the term Son of Man in describing himself.
Yeah, right.
And I think that is to understand that is very important. And when I was in seminary, they didn't understand Jesus' use of the term Son of Man. They connected it with Daniel, but they didn't make any nonviolent connection, or they didn't really see it in the context of Daniel. Right.
And in the crisis in which Daniel is written, the words are just kind of vague prophecy. But if you understand the crisis, then you understand the response. Anyway, well, thank you, everyone. It's kind of time's up, and
well, thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Brother Jerry, and blessings to everyone.